The heat curled off the dry earth in shimmers, rising like ghosts over the dust-caked street of Dust Vale. The sky was too blue, too cloudless, as if the heavens themselves refused to offer any shade for what was about to happen. Helena's hands trembled at her sides. Her fists balled into the delicate lace of the dress her stepmother had forced over her shoulders that morning. It itched, pinched, and reeked of mothballs. She felt like she was being strangled by the past, stitched into a life she never chose. The church loomed ahead, all splintered beams and flaking paint. Its warped steeple pointed up toward a sky that offered no salvation. Townsfolk had begun to gather along the road, some hiding under their hats, others squinting at her without apology. Whispers rolled across the crowd like dry grass across a plain. "She don't look more than 16. That Crane fella's got daughters older than her. Old man Preston finally sold her off, huh?" Helena tried not to look at them. Tried not to think about the fact that she was being walked down the aisle by a man who hadn't held her hand since she was 8, her father, Elias Preston, whose idea of parenting amounted to gruff orders and backhands. He had a debt he couldn't pay, and now she was the payment. "Hold your head up," he muttered, without so much as glancing at her. "Ain't no man wants a sulking wife." She stared straight ahead. Each step toward that church door felt heavier than the last, like the dirt was gripping her ankles. Her legs didn't feel like hers. Neither did the dress. Neither did the life she was being dragged into. Elbert Crane stood at the altar, fat hands folded neatly across his belly, his lips stretched into a smile that made her stomach twist. 50, maybe older. Skin like sour milk left out too long. A long white mustache drooped over yellow teeth. He looked her up and down like he was assessing a piece of livestock, checking hooves, teeth, breeding potential. She swallowed bile. The pews creaked as a few dusty guests stood up. A minister stood between them, sweating into his collar. Helena caught a glimpse of her reflection in a cracked window pane. Wide green eyes, copper curls limp from heat and stress. Face pale as bone. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like a prisoner. It hadn't always been like this. There'd been a time when the world felt big, like the sky might open up to her dreams. Her mama had called her a spitfire, always poking her nose into books, sketching prairie flowers in the dirt, chasing rabbits barefoot. But mama had died when Helena was 10, and the fire slowly dulled under the weight of chores, silence, and her father's rising temper. Joseph had been the only bright spot since then. Joseph Peterson. She remembered the first time she saw him, 18, lean and brown from the sun, with eyes that didn't leer like the other ranch hands. He'd helped her fix a broken fence, and before long, he was fixing her heart too. He listened. He laughed. He made her believe there was still something soft left in the world. But then he disappeared. Her father had caught them talking under the stars one night and had nearly broken Joseph's jaw with the butt of his rifle. The next day, Joseph was gone. Helena had cried until her ribs ached. Weeks passed, then months. No letters. No word. Just silence, like he'd vanished into the very dirt of the canyon. And now this. Her fingers clenched tighter around the wildflower bouquet. The petals were starting to wilt, like they knew better. She stepped into the church, and the air turned thick, like it was watching. The minister cleared his throat, trying to inject cheerfulness into a voice that cracked. "Dearly beloved." She barely heard the rest. Her ears roared like a storm. Her pulse beat in her throat, in her fingers, in her spine. She felt sick. Her father grunted beside her. "Don't screw this up." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She stared at Crane's greasy face. He smelled like sweat, tobacco, and desperation. She wondered how many wives he'd buried before this one. "Do you, Helena Preston, take Elbert Crane?" "No," she whispered. The room went still. "I'm sorry," the minister stuttered. "I said no." She raised her chin. Her voice was louder now, stronger than she'd thought it could be. "I won't do it." Her father's hand clamped down on her arm like a vice. "You'll do what you're told, girl." She jerked free, breathing hard. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but fury. "You'd sell your own daughter like a damn mule." Elias turned beet red. "You ungrateful little." Then the church doors burst open. A boom of noise, a rush of dust. All heads turned. A horse stood outside, lathered and panting. The rider swung down in a flash of motion. Helena's heart jumped into her throat. Joseph. Older. Harder. Leaner. His dark hair was longer, face sharper. A scar across one cheek like he'd wrestled with death and won. He wore a worn duster, holsters at his hips, and a look in his eyes that said he hadn't come for talk. "Step away from her," Joseph growled, voice like flint on stone. Gasps echoed through the room. Crane straightened, blinking like a hog caught in lantern light. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the man she was meant to marry," Joseph said, and drew his gun with a speed that stole the breath from every chest. The barrel pointed at Crane's head, unwavering. "She's not going anywhere with you," Elias barked. "She's not yours to give," Joseph snapped back. His voice cracked, not with weakness, but rage barely leashed. "Not anymore." Helena stepped forward, her hand trembling, but her spine straight as iron. "I thought you were dead." "Not dead," Joseph murmured. "Just fighting to get back to you." The room held still, air thick with gunpowder and destiny. No one moved. The minister took one cautious step backward, as though wanting no part in this divine interruption. "You got no right," Crane sputtered, reaching toward the pistol on his hip. Joseph fired. The shot was precise. Crane's gun flew from its holster, skittering across the church floor. A scream rang out. A child started crying. Helena didn't move. Neither did Joseph. "Try again," he warned. Crane's hands went up. Elias stepped forward, face twitching. "I'll see you hang, boy." "You already tried that once," Joseph said coldly. "Didn't work." Then his eyes turned to Helena. "Softer now, gentler." "Helena, we gotta go. Now." She stared at him. Every rational part of her screamed that this was madness, that Joseph couldn't ride into town, point a gun at a wealthy merchant, and ride off into the sunset. But another part, the part buried under all the years of silence and obedience, said, "This is the only way." She dropped the bouquet. The flowers hit the floor like an execution bell. "I'm coming with you." The room erupted into shouts as Joseph grabbed her hand and pulled her into a run. Gunfire cracked behind them as Crane's men gave chase. Splinters exploded off the doorframe. Horses neighed wildly outside. They mounted the same horse, Helena swinging behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist instinctively. Joseph kicked the horse into a dead sprint, and they thundered down the main street, townsfolk scattering. Bullets sang behind them. A few smacked into barrels and signs. One grazed Helena's shoulder, tearing through lace. She didn't scream, just held on tighter. The town shrank behind them like a bad dream. The sun began to set, painting the canyon in molten golds and blood-red streaks. They didn't speak at first, just rode. After an hour, Joseph finally slowed the horse and guided them off the trail, into the mouth of a canyon where no law dared follow. He dismounted first, then reached up for her. She slid down into his arms. Neither let go. Finally, she whispered against his chest, "I thought you left me." "I tried to stay away," he said, voice low. "But I couldn't forget you. Not for one damn minute." She looked up at him, eyes fierce even as they glistened. "They'll hunt us." "Let him come," Joseph said. And in that moment, Helena Preston, once an obedient daughter, once a sacrificial bride, smiled. Not a soft smile, a dangerous one. Because something in her had changed the moment she dropped that bouquet. And there was no going back. Not now. Not ever. And far behind them, in the fading light of Dust Vale, a storm was brewing. The fire crackled low in the cave's mouth, casting flickering shadows along the rough sandstone walls. Helena sat beside it, cross-legged, her fingers wrapped around a dented tin cup of water. The fabric of her once white wedding dress was now dirt-streaked and torn at the hem. She didn't care. The stars stretched above the desert like distant, icy gods, silent and indifferent. Joseph crouched nearby, checking the wound on his arm, where a bullet had grazed him during their escape. His shirt was torn, blood dried along the fabric. He winced as he prodded it, then glanced at her, offering a faint grin. "You always had a way of dragging me into trouble." She didn't smile. "I didn't ask for you to come back. I didn't come back because you asked." Silence settled between them again, punctuated by the rustle of desert wind against stone. Somewhere a coyote howled. Helena looked out toward the dark open mouth of the canyon, where shadows pooled in shifting shapes. "I thought you were dead." Joseph didn't look at her. "I almost was." He pulled something from his satchel, a piece of rawhide, some crushed herbs, thread, and a needle, and began cleaning his wound. Helena watched the way his fingers moved. Steady, practiced, different than before. He was harder now. Not the boy she remembered, who had once slipped her wildflowers through the barn door. This Joseph had seen blood. "What happened?" she asked finally. He didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "Your father had me tied to a fence post and beat near unconscious. Told me if I ever came within 100 miles of Dustvale again, he'd finish the job. Left me in the sun to die." Helena's fingers tightened around her cup. "A Cherokee hunter found me," he continued. "Named Atza. Took me in, patched me up. Taught me how to shoot, how to ride long distance, how to move quiet through country no white man dares to enter. He saved my life. Gave me a second one." "And you came back for me?" He met her gaze. "I didn't ride 300 miles through Badland and Bounty posters to swap stories around a fire." She looked away, the wind tugging at her tangled hair. "It's not that simple anymore." "It never was," Joseph replied. "But I ain't letting you go back to a man like Crane. Not while I'm breathing." Her eyes flared. "My father would have let him kill me. That's what it was going to be. A slow death. A cage." Joseph said nothing. He just nodded. They ate jerky in silence, the kind that tasted like shoe leather and dust. She winced with each chew, but hunger beat pride. When the fire burned low to embers, Joseph rolled out a blanket and offered it to her. "You sleep. I'll keep watch." "I'm not going to sleep. Not after today." "You have to," he said. "We're going to be hunted by morning." Helena stared at the blanket, then slowly lay down. Her body ached. Her mind wouldn't stop spinning. Joseph sat at the cave's mouth, rifle across his knees, gaze scanning the darkness like a hawk. She closed her eyes to the sound of wind and fire, and for the first time in days, the silence wasn't cruel. Morning came like a match strike, quick, hot, and blinding. They were already riding by sunup, pushing the horse through narrow canyons and creek beds, trying to stay off the ridges where silhouettes were easy pickings for riflemen. Joseph moved like he knew the land, cutting through arroyos and winding game trails that Helena would never have found on her own. "You always know where you're going now?" she asked. He grinned. "Most of the time. The other times I bluff and pray." Helena chuckled, surprising herself. It felt strange, like laughter had to be shaken loose from inside her. They reached a rocky outcrop by mid-morning and stopped for water at a seep trickling from the canyon wall. Helena leaned over, splashing her face, wiping dirt and sweat from her neck. Her reflection in the shallow pool looked older, sharper, like she'd burned through a year overnight. "I killed a man once," Joseph said behind her. She froze. 2 winters ago. He tried to take a child from a camp Atza, and I were traveling with. I shot him through the gut, watched him bleed out in the snow." She turned to him. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because I'm not the same man you knew. Thought you deserved to know." Helena stood slowly. "Then I'll tell you something too." She stepped toward him, her voice low. "I dreamed of you every night for months. And every morning I woke up and remembered that I was still there, and you were still gone. And when my father told me I was marrying Crane, I waited for you. I came as fast as I could," Joseph said. "I know. I had to stop believing you were coming." "Joseph." "It was the only way to survive it." Their eyes held. Then he nodded once, not as an apology, but as an understanding. By noon, the heat rose in waves. Helena spotted vultures in the distance, 3 black dots spiraling in lazy circles. "We need to keep moving," Joseph said. But Helena stopped. Something wasn't right. From the ridge to the west came the distant crack of a rifle. A bullet ricocheted off a stone 2 feet from her boot. Down. Joseph yanked her to the dirt. Gunfire echoed again. "They found us." She crawled behind a boulder as Joseph returned fire, popping off around toward the ridge. Only one shooter, he muttered. Bounty hunter. Lone trigger, probably greedy. What do we do? I'll draw him. You circle wide. See that ravine behind us? She nodded. Go there. Move fast. I'll handle him. Helena hesitated. What if you don't? I will. Joseph moved like water. Quick, silent, and lethal. He vanished into the brush as Helena bolted the other way, her heart pounding so hard it hurt her ribs. She scrambled through brambles, cut her hand on a jagged rock, and slid down the embankment into the ravine, panting. Time seemed to fold in on itself. Every second was a scream. Then, a shot cracked across the sky. And then, another. Then silence. Helena waited 5 minutes that felt like an hour. Then she saw him. Joseph emerged from the brush, limping slightly, a fresh scrape on his cheek. Is it done? She whispered. He nodded. Won't be sending no telegram. She reached for him, touched his arm, then embraced him, without thinking. His arms wrapped around her like they never wanted to let go. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For doubting you. Don't be. You're still here. That's all that matters. They pressed on until sunset, the orange sky bleeding into purple behind the cliffs. They found another cave, this one deeper and cooler. Helena tore strips from her ruined dress to clean Joseph's wound. He didn't flinch. I remember you were scared of blood, he said. I'm not anymore. He smiled. You're different. So are you. She sat back, brushing dirt from her knees. We can't keep running forever. Crane will keep sending men. Joseph nodded. Then we stop running. Start fighting. You mean kill them all? I mean we take away his power. And I know how. Helena looked at him, eyes narrow. How? Crane has enemies. So does your father. Not everyone's loyal. Some folks in Dust Vale don't like how he does business. If we can get to them, expose the truth, what he's done, how he's tried to buy off the law, we can turn this around. You think they'll listen to me? I think a girl who escaped a forced marriage with a rich bastard, with bullet wounds to prove it, might just shake up some hearts. Helena smiled, small, dangerous. Then let's do it. Joseph leaned back, staring at the stars again. After tonight, we find allies. And we bring this to him. The fire burned low. Helena curled beside Joseph, not from fear, but something steadier. She didn't feel like a runaway anymore. She felt like a woman on a mission. Sleep came in fits. Coyotes cried in the distance. At dawn, Joseph gently shook her awake. Time to ride. She sat up, eyes bleary but determined. Where? To the outlaw town up north, Grave Rock. It's where folks go when they got nowhere else. And sometimes they fight harder because of it. Think they'll help us? If we give them a reason. They saddled up and rode into the wind. Helena didn't look back. She didn't need to. Whatever fear she'd felt was behind her, with the ashes of that church and the bouquet she dropped. Ahead, the path was blood and grit and fire. And she would walk it as the girl who didn't kneel. Not for her father. Not for a monster like Crane. Not ever again. By the third day, Helena's thighs ached from riding and her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she kept her back straight in the saddle. Joseph rode ahead, shoulders squared against the wind, scanning the horizon with the eyes of a man who expected bullets behind every bush. They hadn't spoken much since sunrise. Words felt like luxuries now, and they were hoarding every scrap of energy for the road ahead. The desert stretched endlessly, gold and rust, and pale bone beneath a sun that showed no mercy. The terrain was shifting. Hills rose like sleeping beasts in the distance. There were fewer trees now, more stone, the sky widening into an unforgiving bowl of light. They followed an old wagon trail scarred with time, a half-buried skeleton of westward dreams long gone sour. Joseph slowed his horse near an outcropping of black rock. He raised a hand. Helena stopped beside him, squinting toward where he was looking. Something glittered faintly up ahead, metal. A broken wagon axle. Old, maybe a decade. But the tracks beside it were not. Fresh hoofprints, moving fast. They're close, he said. How many? 3 horses. One with a limp. If they're bounty men, they ain't subtle. Helena slid from the saddle, muscles protesting. What do? We lead them into ground they don't know. Then we take them out one by one. She flinched. You mean kill them? He looked at her, not coldly, but with resignation. They won't stop. You know that. If they catch us, it won't be a trial. It'll be a bullet and a bounty slip. Helena wiped dust from her face. Then let's lead them. They took a sharp detour into a narrow ravine, where the canyon walls rose like prison bars and shade dripped down in long, cool ribbons. Joseph dismounted and studied the walls. We can hold them here, but it'll be tight. She nodded, then swallowed hard. I'll help. He shook his head. You're not. I've already shot once. I can do it again. Joseph studied her for a long moment, then handed her a short-barreled revolver. 5 rounds. Keep your hands steady. Breathe. She took it without hesitation. They waited in silence. Minutes stretched thin. Helena crouched behind a fallen boulder, heart pounding in her throat. She imagined her father's face, Crane's leering grin, the whispers in the church. The smell of gun oil, dirt, and dried blood filled her lungs. Joseph stood 10 feet ahead, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. Then came the riders. The first appeared like a shadow, then 2 more behind him, laughing, careless. Joseph waited until the lead horseman reached the narrowest point. He fired once. The man toppled sideways, screaming as his legs split open. The others panicked, trying to turn in the tight space. Helena's hands trembled. She squeezed the trigger too early, the bullet ricocheting off stone. One of the riders spotted her and charged. She raised the revolver again. This time, she didn't hesitate. The second shot hit him in the chest. He fell. Joseph dropped the third with a clean shot through the shoulder, then ran forward and kicked the man's rifle away. The outlaw groaned, blood pooling in the sand. Joseph turned to Helena. You all right? She stood slowly, gun still smoking in her hand. I killed him. You saved us. She blinked back the tears that stung her eyes. I didn't even think. I just did it. That's how you stay alive out here. I'm not sure I like who I'm becoming. He stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. You're not becoming someone else. You're surviving. There's a difference. They buried the dead men in shallow graves and stripped them of supplies. One had jerky, a canteen, and a pocket compass. The third carried a wanted poster of Helena and Joseph, the ink still fresh. $500, dead or alive. They've upped the price, Joseph muttered. Means Crane scared. Good, Helena said. Let him feel hunted for once. By nightfall, they found shelter near an abandoned mining camp nestled in the hills. The wooden shack was half collapsed, but it had 4 walls and a roof, which was more than they'd had in days. Helena lit a fire inside the stone hearth, using old splinters and sagebrush. The flame bloomed with a whoosh, casting golden warmth into the broken corners. Joseph slumped against the wall, arm bleeding again from where his bandage had slipped. Helena kneeled beside him, biting her lip. We need to stitch it. He gave her a pained smile. You sew anything other than wedding dresses? Only dreams and expectations, she muttered, but she pulled out the thread and needle without another word. She sterilized the needle in the fire, then knelt beside him, brow furrowed. Joseph didn't flinch as she pushed the needle through his skin. He just grunted once, then bit down on a strip of leather. You've changed too, she said softly as she worked. Not just the scar and the way you shoot. You carry something heavier now. I buried a lot of people, Helena, he said after a beat. And I lived through things that don't have names. You learn to shut up and move forward. She finished the last stitch and tied it off. You don't have to do that with me. His gaze found hers. I know. They sat close by the fire, silence wrapping around them like a worn blanket. Outside, wind howled through the broken boards of the shack. Helena leaned her head on Joseph's shoulder, and he let it rest there. They didn't speak of the dead or the road ahead. They simply breathed in the firelight and held on. In the morning, they would ride again. To Grave Rock. Joseph spoke first. You sure about this plan? No, Helena admitted. But I know one thing for damn sure. I can't go back. So the only way out is forward. You think outlaws will listen to you? I'm not asking for loyalty. Just firepower. He chuckled. You've got enough fire for a whole damn regiment. She grinned faintly. I think I might. That night, she dreamed of the church again. But this time, it wasn't her father dragging her down the aisle. It was her, standing tall, a revolver in one hand and her mother's voice echoing somewhere in the rafters. You were born wild, girl. Don't let them cage you. She woke with the sunrise pouring through the broken roof. Joseph was already up, checking the saddle straps. Helena stepped outside and stared out over the hills. Somewhere out there, Elbert Crane still drank from silver cups and twisted gold rings on his fat fingers, believing himself untouchable. But the truth was rolling toward him, slow and steady as thunder before a storm. And this time, the bride was coming for the groom. She pulled her coat tight and walked back into the shack, where Joseph waited with a cup of boiled coffee, and that look in his eyes that said he was ready to burn down every mile left between them and justice. So they saddled up. 2 fugitives. 2 warriors. And somewhere between fear and firelight, they stopped running. The town of Grave Rock crouched between 2 scorched hills, like a rusted dog waiting to bite. It wasn't a place for law or mercy. The signs were crooked, the saloons loud, and the eyes that watched from doorways didn't blink kindly. But Helena rode through its main road like she belonged there, dust streaked across her cheekbones, revolver at her hip, and Joseph at her side, blood crusted on his sleeve, gaze hard as dry stone. They stopped at the crooked post outside a saloon called the Broken Fong. The swinging doors creaked open and spilled out cigar smoke, fiddle music, and the kind of laughter that meant someone had just lost a fortune or a tooth. Joseph tied the horse. Sure about this? I'm not here to ask for favors, Helena said. I'm here to offer vengeance. He smirked. That might work better than gold in this place. She walked through those doors, and silence hit like a slap. Cards paused mid-deal. A piano player let his hand fall from the keys. Every outlaw gambler and gun hand in that room turned to look the girl with fire in her eyes and a pistol on her hip. Helena stepped into the middle of a saloon and said, loud and clear, I'm looking for women who know the name Elbert Crane. If he ever burned you, beat you, or buried someone you loved, I got a reason for you to stand up. A heavy woman at the bar turned slowly. Her hair was graying at the roots, but her shoulders were square and her eyes sharp. I knew him, she said. Used to be my husband. Before he bought another girl half my age and had the sheriff call me a lunatic. Another woman stood, scars trailing down her throat. He put my sister in the ground. Called it discipline. The town let him. Helena nodded once. He's got 3 bounty men buried in the desert. My father sold me to him. I didn't marry the bastard, but I aim to make sure no one else does. Joseph stepped beside her. She means to hit him where it hurts, but she can't do alone. The piano player started playing again, slow and low. Cards resumed, but the 2 women approached. Then another. Then 2 more. 6 women in total stood with Helena before the hour was out. They had grit in their bones and hate that hadn't dulled with time. One of them, a young widow named Lorna, spoke up. We'll ride with you. But Crane's got money, men, and that fake lawman in his pocket. Then we take away all 3, Helena said. We hid his wagons, his payroll, his trust. I want the town to see him for what he is before we burn his name to dust. Plans came together fast. Joseph led them to Devil's Pass, a choke point of jagged rocks and narrow turns. Crane was due to travel through there with his private convoy in 3 days. Helena spent those nights sleeping with her back against cold stone and her thoughts racing like storm winds. She dreamed of her mother again, not as a ghost, but as a guide, whispering strength into her bones. On the morning of the 3rd day, Helena stood above the pass, rifle in hand. Below, the canyon stretched out like a trap waiting to be sprung. The women were positioned on both ridges. Joseph was farther ahead with a pair of dynamite sticks rigged to a loose boulder. His face was set like stone. Hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. They came slow at first, Crane's men leading 3 wagons, 2 guards per side, rifles loose in their saddles. Crane himself rode in the center, under a canopy, dressed in a velvet vest and smugness. Helena's heart pounded. She waited. The wagons moved into the kill zone. Joseph gave the signal. The boulder exploded down the cliffside, smashing the rear wagon and sealing off the trail. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Dust flew. Helena raised her rifle and fired. The shot clipped a guard's shoulder, sending him sprawling. Lorna took the next, dropping a man from his horse. Gunfire erupted from both sides as Crane's convoy scattered, panicking under the rain of bullets and rock. Crane screamed something inaudible, trying to pull his horse around. But Joseph was already there. He stepped into the path, rifle leveled, hat low. Hello again, Crane. The old man's eyes widened. You're dead. Not yet, Joseph said. Crane reached for his pistol. Joseph shot the weapon from his hand. Then Helena emerged from the ridge, sliding down the embankment with her revolver drawn. Her dress was torn, boots cracked, but she moved with the fury of every woman he'd ever tried to own. Crane fell back against his saddle. You can't do this. I am doing this, she said. And not just for me. For every girl you bought, beat, or buried. One of the convoy's guards tried to rush Joseph. Lorna shot him clean through the throat. The battle was over in 5 minutes. When the dust settled, Crane was on his knees, bleeding from a split lip, hands shaking. Joseph tossed him a rag. Wipe your mouth, Elbert. You're leaking lies. Helena stood over him, revolver steady. The other women watched, silent, breathless. Do it, Crane rasped. You want to be a killer now? That it? Just like me. Helena's eyes were calm. I'm nothing like you, she said. And then she shot him in the leg. Crane screamed, fell sideways. You'll live, Helena said coldly. Long enough to see your name rot. They stripped him of weapons, cash, and pride. The other wagons carried letters, payroll ledgers, documents proving bribery of Dust Vale's sheriff and townsmen. By nightfall, Helena rode back into Dust Vale with Joseph and the women behind her. The townsfolk scattered as they came until they stopped in the square outside the church. Helena dismounted. She nailed Crane's wanted poster to the front door. Your king is dead, she said to the stunned townsfolk. And we ain't kneeling again. Joseph walked beside her, quiet, steady. What now? He asked. She looked at the horizon, where the sky burned gold over the hills. Now, Helena said, now we build something new. One plank, one bullet, one free woman at a time. He smiled. Behind them, the saloon doors opened. The women came out laughing, guns holstered, hair blowing wild in the wind. Helena turned one last time toward the church, where she was nearly condemned to a cage. Then she walked away from it, from everything that tried to break her. The bride had revolted, and the world would never forget it.
The train hissed like a dying snake as it pulled into the station, brakes shrieking against steel. Dust from the prairie clung to every surface, settling on wood, metal, and sweat-slick brows. Rachel Bell sat still in her seat until the train groaned to a stop, her gloved hands trembling in her lap. One rested over her stomach, as if she could shield her child from what came next. The conductor shouted something she didn't catch, and people began to disembark. Travelers with sun-beaten hats, ranchers returning from cattle sales, women with parasols and tight smiles. Rachel stood, smoothed her second-hand dress, and reached for the small leather suitcase beneath her feet. It was cracked at the seams, much like the heart she carried. She stepped down from the train into a dry heat that bit at her cheeks. The town was small, barely more than a single street lined with saloons, a church, a general store, and a half-painted sheriff's office. Everything else stretched out into endless ochre, the high desert plains scattered scrub, and hills that shimmered in the sun like broken glass. Rachel adjusted her shawl to conceal her rounded belly, though at nearly 6 months along, it was nearly impossible. Still, she tried. She always tried. Her heart thundered as she scanned the waiting faces. He wasn't hard to spot. Horace Kemper stood at the far end of the platform, arms crossed, boots polished, mustache trimmed. He looked like the kind of man who ordered others around and expected never to be questioned. His hat was wide-brimmed, black, and spotless, like it had never seen dirt, only power. He held the letter she'd sent clutched in one hand. As she approached, his eyes slid from her face to her belly. They froze there. The silence was thick. Rachel offered a gentle smile. "Mr. Kemper, I'm Rachel Bell, from the correspondence." "You're pregnant," he said. The smile faltered. "Yes, I mentioned I was a widow. My fiancé died just before we were to be married." "You didn't say you were pregnant." "I thought," she swallowed. "I thought maybe that wouldn't matter. I'm a good cook, I can sew, and I'm healthy. I work hard. I wanted to start again." He stared at her like she'd spat in his coffee. "You didn't say you were damaged." Rachel's mouth opened, but no words came. The sun beat down harder than before. All sound seemed to vanish from a platform. Even the wind held its breath. "I came here," she said finally, her voice cracking, "because I believed your letter. You said you wanted a woman with strong values. A woman of faith. A family." "I didn't mean somebody else's family," he snapped. "I need a proper wife. One who doesn't come with complications." People were turning now, watching. A few travelers paused to see the show. One woman whispered behind a fan. Rachel's ears rang. "I spent all my money getting here," she said. "Please, just let me explain." Horace tore the letter in half right in front of her, then dropped it to the ground. "I don't need to hear anything more. You should have stayed back east." He turned and walked away without another word. Rachel stood alone as her suitcase toppled over, its contents spilling into the dust: 2 dresses, a worn Bible, a ribbon meant for the baby's crib. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather everything with shaking hands. The tears didn't come right away. They came slow, hot, and humiliating. She forced them down. There were eyes on her, watching, judging. One little boy pointed and asked his mother why the lady was crying. The mother pulled him away, like Rachel carried disease. She rose, stuffed the last of her things into the case, and walked down the street with no direction, no plan. Just a heartbeat that echoed twice, hers and her child's. Every door she passed was closed. She asked for water at the saloon, was told it ain't for her kind. She tried the general store, but the owner wouldn't meet her eye. By the time the sun was slipping behind the hills, Rachel sat beneath the covered porch of the abandoned stagecoach office, clutching her case like a life raft. Her shoes were scuffed, her throat dry, and her belly heavy. Her baby shifted, and she whispered to it, "I'm so sorry. I thought we were going somewhere good." A wind picked up, dry, cold, howling. It dragged dust along the street, rattled shutters, and carried with it the sharp tang of distant fire. Her dress whipped around her knees. Then she heard footsteps. Boots. Slow. Deliberate. She looked up. The man was tall, over 6 feet, with a broad frame and rough-hewn features that spoke of labor and loss. His hat was low over his eyes, his duster long and weather-beaten. A revolver hung at his side, but his hands were empty. He stopped just short of the porch and said nothing. Rachel stood slowly, ready to retreat. He tipped his hat back. His eyes were gray. Steady. "You got somewhere to be?" She shook her head, wary. "No." "You got anyone to help you?" Another shake. He nodded toward the edge of town. "I've got a place. Nothing fancy, but it's got a stove and a roof that don't leak. You and the baby can rest there, if you want." She squinted at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "Ain't right what happened." "That's not your problem." "Don't reckon it is." "Still ain't right." She stared at him. He didn't leer, didn't glance at her belly. He looked her in the eye, then at the suitcase, and then at the sky. "Storm's coming," he added. As if to prove the point, thunder rumbled over the hills. Rachel hesitated for another breath before finally nodding. He reached out, not for her, but for the suitcase, picked it up like it weighed nothing, then turned, not checking if she followed. She did. The walk was quiet. Town fell away behind them. The man led her along a narrow trail through scrub and juniper trees until they reached a modest cabin tucked at the edge of a dry creek bed. Smoke curled from a chimney. Inside it was dim but warm. A fire burned in the hearth. The floor was swept clean. There were 2 chairs, a cot, a table, and a simple kitchen with a stew pot simmering. He placed her suitcase by the cot. "Rest. You look like you need it." Rachel finally asked, "What's your name?" He turned, paused, then said, "Elias. Elias Hart." She sat on the cot, bone-tired and numb. "I'm Rachel." "I figured." He turned back to the stove and stirred the stew without another word. She watched him in the firelight. His movements were unhurried, but not lazy. There was something coiled beneath his calm, a man who had seen trouble and made peace with it. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. The baby kicked. She placed her hand over the movement, blinking fast. Elias broke the silence again. "You're not the first this town's turned on," he said. She said nothing. "I ain't gonna ask questions you don't want to answer. But you're safe here. Long as you want to be." She turned her head to look at him. "You expect something for this?" He looked over, brow furrowed. "No. Men usually do. I ain't most men." There was nothing more to say after that. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling, stew bubbling, and Elias humming something low and sad. A tune that might have once had words, but didn't anymore. Outside, thunder cracked again, louder this time. The storm rolled over the hills, and the night swallowed the town whole. In the morning, she'd have to decide what came next. But for now, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't made a mistake stepping off that train. Maybe not every man turned away from a woman who came with a little baggage and a lot of heart. And maybe, in a town full of locked doors, one had opened just wide enough for hope to step through. The cabin smelled of pine sap, smoke, and something rich simmering over the stove. Rachel stood just inside the threshold, fingers still curled around the doorframe. Her boots, caked with dust, left soft prints on the clean wooden floor. Behind her, the wind clawed at the dark with dry hands, howling like a creature denied warmth. But here inside, everything was still. Elias didn't speak. He moved with quiet assurance, ladling stew into 2 tin bowls. The firelight glinted off the curve of his jaw, catching in the stubble and lines etched deep by weather, work, or both. She hadn't said much since they'd arrived, just nodded when he gestured to the cot and sat stiff-backed on its edge. She kept her coat wrapped around her, even though the fire gave off generous heat. Her suitcase rested beside her like a nervous dog. He handed her the bowl and a spoon, then sat across from her at the table. No grace was said. No words were offered. Just the sound of 2 people eating in silence. It should have been awkward. It wasn't. Elias's presence didn't demand anything. That alone unnerved her more than if he had. Rachel took her first bite and blinked. "This is good. Stew's better the longer it cooks." She glanced around. The cabin was small but cared for. Books lined a shelf above the hearth. A rifle hung on 2 hooks near the door. The bed in the far corner was neatly made. A quilt of dark blues and grays, hand-stitched. "You live here alone?" "I do." "For how long?" "Couple years." She looked at him directly. "You don't talk much, do you?" He met her gaze with a shrug. "Folks say enough without me adding to it." She couldn't help a slight smile. "And here I thought men out west were full of themselves." "Some are," he said. "But those are usually the ones with something to prove." Rachel didn't ask what he had to prove, or what he was hiding. But the curiosity itched at her just beneath her skin. She pushed it aside, focused on eating. Each spoonful brought warmth back to her bones. She hadn't realized how cold she'd gotten until it began to thaw. When the bowl was empty, she placed it on the small table beside the cot and curled onto her side. Her hand drifted instinctively to her belly. The baby moved again, restless, like always when she was near warmth. "You can sleep there," Elias said, standing. "I'll take the chair." "You don't have to." "I know." He took the rifle from the wall, checked it without a word, then propped it near the door. His movements were second nature, routine. He wasn't doing it for show, which meant he thought there might be reason to use it. Rachel adjusted the pillow and let her eyes close, but sleep hovered just out of reach. The cabin creaked in the wind. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. Elias sat in the chair beside the fire, staring into the flames. After a time, she asked, "Why'd you help me?" He didn't answer right away. "Because no one else did," he said finally. "I don't know if I can trust you." "You don't have to." She turned toward him, watching the profile of his face in the firelight. His jaw was tense, not with anger, but with restraint. The kind of man who carried things he never said aloud. "I was supposed to marry him," she whispered. "The father of my child. He died during a robbery at the Mercantile, shot trying to protect a stranger." Elias didn't look at her, but she knew he was listening. "I wrote Horace, thinking maybe it was a way to start fresh. I never expected love. Just a place, a roof, a chance to raise my child with dignity. And he called you damaged." "Yes." Elias nodded slowly. "Men like that think dignity's something you earn by being born the right way, wearing the right dress, carrying the right name." Rachel watched him for a long moment. "What about you?" she asked softly. "What did you lose?" Elias's eyes flickered toward her for the first time since she'd begun talking. Something raw passed through his gaze, but he looked back to the fire and said nothing. That was answer enough. The wind howled again. Rachel closed her eyes and, for the first time in months, allowed herself to feel tired without guilt. She slept deeper than she expected. When morning came, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of eggs frying in a pan. Light poured through the single window, turning the edges of the room gold. She sat up slowly, hand on her belly. The child within was quiet, as if sleeping too. Elias handed her a plate. He looked like he'd been up for hours. "I could have cooked," she offered. "You needed rest more. You always this decent. Just with people who don't deserve worse." Rachel ate, slower than last night. The silence between them was different now. Familiar. After breakfast, Elias pulled on his coat. "Gonna head into town. Grab some supplies." Her heart jolted. "You're coming back?" He turned. "You want me to?" She didn't answer, but something in her chest loosened. Elias nodded. "I'll be back by sundown." Lock the door behind me. As soon as he left, the cabin felt bigger, emptier. She wandered through it slowly, taking in every detail. A photograph tucked in a drawer, too worn to see clearly, but she could make out a woman and a little boy. His son? His wife? He'd said nothing of family. Later, Rachel swept the floor, washed the dishes, and reorganized the shelves. She worked because it helped her think, because it gave her something to hold onto in a world that kept tilting beneath her feet. By mid-afternoon, clouds gathered. Thunder rumbled in the distance. She stepped outside just as the first droplets fell. Elias returned as promised. His coat was soaked, and he carried 2 sacks of goods: flour, beans, coffee, and a length of linen. "Thought you might want something to sew with," he said, setting it on the table. She looked at the fabric. Pale blue, soft. "For the baby," he added. Her throat tightened. "Thank you." He pulled off his coat and hung it by the fire. The storm outside thickened. Rain fell in sheets. The wind rattled the windows. They spent the rest of the day inside, talking in snatches. Rachel learned Elias used to be a ranch hand, that he had left a job back east and never looked back. He never mentioned the photo, and she didn't press. After supper, she sat on the cot mending a tear in her shawl. He carved something small from a piece of pine, his hand steady, patient. The quiet between them was peaceful. Rachel couldn't remember the last time she'd felt anything close to peace. "You can stay here as long as you want," Elias said suddenly. She looked up. "I mean it. No pressure. No expectations. Just a place to rest. Raise your child, if that's what you want." Rachel set her sewing down. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. You know I bring trouble." He gave her a faint smile. "Don't we all?" A beat passed. She asked, "You ever wonder if folks like us, people the world throws out, maybe we find each other for a reason?" Elias didn't smile at that, but he nodded. "I think the world's too cruel for accidents." Rachel didn't say anything else. Her hand drifted to her belly again, and she whispered something only the child could hear. Outside, the rain slowed. Inside, something had shifted, soft as breath, strong as promise. And though she wouldn't admit it aloud, Rachel Bell, abandoned, rejected, and called damaged, had begun to wonder if she'd stumbled not into another mistake, but into something rare. A quiet kind of refuge. The beginning of a life not built on fear or survival, but choice. She watched Elias as he carved in the firelight and felt, just for a moment, safe. But safety in the West never came without a price. And some debts always came due. The townsfolk had always fed on gossip the way wolves did on raw meat, ravenous, messy, and with no care for the bones they left behind. Rachel Bell, once a stranger stepped off a train, had now become the centerpiece of every whispered conversation that clung like smoke in the corners of saloons, the pews of churches, and the porches where idle hands pretended to mend. The story changed each time it was told. To some, she was a loose woman who'd tricked two men and fled from justice. To others, a devil in a dress, hiding sin behind a soft face. There were a few who simply pitied her, though not enough to speak up, and certainly not enough to stand beside her. Elias knew the moment he walked into town that week. Heads turned faster. Voices dropped lower. Even a sheriff, a man who rarely bothered with small-town scuttlebutt, pulled Elias aside in front of the post office. "You stirring things up, Hart?" Sheriff Crane asked, pushing his hat back and squinting at the sky, as if the sun might give him an answer Elias wouldn't. "I'm minding my own," Elias said flatly. "Horace Kemper's been telling folks you're shacking up with his bride. Says you took what's his. She ain't his." "That don't matter to the kind of men who follow Horace," the sheriff warned. "They're not big on facts. Just loud voices and quick tempers." Elias's eyes narrowed, jaw tensing. "They come for her. They'll meet me first." "I ain't doubting you," Crane muttered, stepping back. "Just saying I've seen good men buried, because they fought the wrong kind of stupid." He walked off, but Elias stood a while longer in the street, shoulders drawn tight beneath his coat, eyes hard under the brim of his hat. The town had shifted. He could feel it in the ground like a storm building below the dirt. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sky was already bruising. Rachel met him at the door, sleeves rolled, hands floured. She had been baking biscuits by the smell of them, and her cheeks were pink with heat and exertion. "You were gone longer than usual," she said. He brushed past her, set down the sack of goods, ran into the sheriff. Her hands stilled. "What did he say?" "Same thing the wind's been saying for days. Trouble's coming." Rachel exhaled slowly and turned back to the stove, but the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "Maybe we should leave." No, Elias's answer came too quickly. He softened it with, "This place, it's yours now. Ours, if you want it. I won't let them chase us off it." She didn't respond, but when she served him supper, her hands trembled slightly. That night, as he sat carving a block of cedar into something he hadn't decided the shape of yet, Rachel spoke from the cot. "I dreamed last night the cabin was burning. I couldn't find you. I was alone with the baby, and the smoke, it was thick, choking." Elias didn't lift his eyes. Dreams are just thoughts that got lost. Or warnings. He looked up at her, saw the worry swimming behind her voice. She didn't scare easily. But the town, the people, what they could do with enough hatred and too little conscience, that was a different kind of danger. That was fear sharpened into action. He set down the carving and checked the rifle by the door. That night, neither of them slept. 2 days later, the fire came. It began as a whisper in the dark. Rachel awoke to the scent. Acrid, bitter, unmistakable. Smoke. Her eyes snapped open, heart already racing. In the next instant, she heard the crackling outside the window, followed by the soft, insidious roar of flames licking wood. "Elias!" she shouted. He was already at the door, half-dressed, eyes wide and alert. The fire had wrapped itself around the rear of the cabin. Flames leapt from the brush, feeding on the dry summer like it had waited for this moment all season. "Back door!" he yelled, grabbing the rifle and tossing it over his shoulder. Rachel struggled to her feet, one arm wrapped around her belly. The smoke was thick now, curling through the gaps in the windows, reaching in with hot fingers. Elias grabbed her suitcase and threw open the door. The heat struck like a wave. They ran. Ash rained from the sky. The world was a blur of orange and black, like some wicked oil painting turned to chaos. Rachel coughed violently, her legs nearly giving out. Elias stayed close, hand on her elbow, guiding her away from the inferno that had once been their home. Behind them, the cabin groaned, a sound like splintering ribs. Rachel turned just in time to see the roof collapse, sparks exploding into the night sky like fireworks birthed from hell. They made it to the tree line, breathless, lungs scorched, clothes smudged with soot. Elias pulled her down behind a boulder and scanned the horizon. Someone did this, Rachel gasped. It wasn't an accident. Elias didn't answer, but his silence was heavier than any confirmation. In his eyes she saw it, rage buried deep under restraint. Whoever had done this had meant for them to die in that fire. Horace, she breathed. Or one of his, Elias said grimly. He's been stirring up the town. Rachel trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. They meant to kill us. You and the baby, Elias corrected quietly. They don't care about me. She gritted her teeth. I care. His eyes flicked to hers, startled by the edge in her voice. They didn't return to the ruins until dawn. The fire had eaten everything. The walls, the cot, the books, the quilt. All gone. Only a few blackened posts stood, stubborn and skeletal against the pale sky. Elias sifted through the rubble, retrieving what he could. His revolver, half buried and charred. A tin cup, the blade he'd carved with. Rachel picked through the ashes near where the kitchen had been. Beneath a pile of scorched wood, her fingers touched something hard. A rifle. She pulled it free, coughing as soot coated her palms. The weapon was old, but well cared for. The initials etched into the wood were faint, but still legible. E.H. She turned to Elias, holding it up. His face darkened. You weren't meant to find that. She didn't press, but her mind whirled. Who were you? She asked quietly. Doesn't matter. I think it does. Elias ran a hand down his jaw. I was someone who did things he regrets. That name don't belong to me anymore. And yet, she said, brushing ash from the initials, it's still yours. He looked at her then, really looked. And whatever he saw there made him sigh and sit on one of the burned logs. I rode with a crew once, young and stupid. Thought I could carve a name out of a world with grit and a gun. Got people hurt. Innocence. I walked away before I became like the worst of them. But the name still follows. Rachel sat beside him, her belly pressing against her knees. I don't care what your name used to be, she said. I care about the man who saved me, who gave me shelter, who didn't ask questions. He glanced at her sideways. Even now. She nodded. Especially now. He stared out at the ruins of the cabin. We can rebuild. She gave a small smile. You're not giving up. Never have. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried out across the canyon. They left that day, heading into town with soot still in their hair and blistered hands wrapped around each other's strength. Elias walked with a rifle slung across his back, Rachel steady beside him, the baby kicking softly beneath her ribs. When they reached the town's edge, every eye turned toward them. The whispers began immediately. But Rachel didn't flinch. She met those stares with her chin high and her eyes bright. Sheriff Crane stepped forward from a boardwalk, eyes roving over the blackened, soot still clinging to them. Jesus, he muttered. They really tried. Elias just nodded. You know who? The sheriff asked. Doesn't matter, Elias said. Not yet. Rachel spoke up, voice stronger than ever before. I want a roof over our heads and the names of those who stood watching when Horace stirred the mob. Crane's eyebrows lifted. You want justice? I want peace, she said. But I'm willing to fight for it. He tipped his hat. Then let's start with a place to stay. They moved into a one-room cabin on the edge of town, empty for years, but with good bones. Townsfolk watched, uncertain. But the tide had shifted. A few dropped off food. Someone delivered nails and timber. Not everyone was cruel. At night, Elias stood at the edge of the porch, watching the horizon. Rachel joined him, belly pressing forward, wrapped in Elias's coat. They won't stop, will they? She asked. No, he said. But neither will we. And that was the truth. The fire hadn't broken them. It had revealed them. And the next time someone tried to put them down, they'd be ready. The wind carried heat that day, dry and sharp, like it had been sharpened against the canyon walls before sliding into town. Dust swirled across the wooden planks of the main street, catching in the folds of skirts and the creases of old men's eyes. Something was coming. Everyone felt it. Rachel Bell stood outside the newly rebuilt cabin at the edge of town, her belly full and round beneath a faded blue dress. Her hand rested lightly over it, fingers curled as if already protecting the child inside. She watched the trail, heart thudding against her ribs with a mix of dread and resolve. Elias Hart stood beside her, rifle slung over one shoulder, jaw set like stone. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were darker than usual, not with fear, but with decision. That kind of stare that came from a man who'd seen blood, survived it, and was ready to spill more if need be. "They're coming," Rachel said. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just waited. A cloud of riders rose over the hill like a bruise on the horizon. 8 men, all armed. At the center rode Horace Kemper, clean-shaven and smiling like the devil himself in a white hat. His boots were polished. His coat gleamed. But his eyes were empty. Behind them, townsfolk gathered at windows, behind curtains and half-cracked doors. The streets emptied. The air changed. Rachel felt it in her blood. So did the baby. A single kick, hard and sudden. "You can go inside," Elias said quietly. "No," she replied. "This is my fight too." He looked at her. There was no arguing. The riders slowed to a trot, then dismounted as one. Horace approached with a calm stroll, hands visible, voice oily. "Well, well, ain't this a picture? Little Miss Bell, standing proud like a queen on a pile of ashes. Thought you'd learned your lesson already." Rachel's voice was steady. "That you can't burn out a soul that don't fear you?" Horace chuckled. "You always did have a sharp tongue. Bet that got you into trouble plenty back east." Elias shifted beside her, one step forward. "That's far enough." Horace looked him up and down. "You really think you're going to keep her? That baby? You got no name, no land, no law behind you." "I got enough. I'm here to take what's mine," Horace said, louder now, so the town could hear. She was promised. "I have letters, contracts. This is legal." Rachel stepped forward. "You ripped those letters up in front of a crowd. You lied. I told you I was a widow. You assumed that meant clean and empty." Her voice cracked like lightning. "I am not empty. I am not ashamed. And you, Horace Kemper, you're a coward hiding behind paper because you can't stand beside a woman who's stronger than you'll ever be." The men behind Horace shifted uneasily. One of them glanced toward the crowd that was beginning to gather, quiet but watching. "You can't speak to me like that," Horace barked. Rachel's hand tightened over her stomach. "I just did." "Enough," Horace snapped. He turned to Elias. "This is your last chance. Give her up, or I'll take her." Elias exhaled slowly and unslung the rifle from his shoulder. "Try." The moment snapped like a dry twig. One of Horace's men drew. Elias moved first. The rifle barked once. The shooter dropped with a scream, clutching his thigh. Another reached for his holster. Elias was already on him. 2 shots rang out, quick, clean. One hit the man's shoulder. The second drove the others back. The crowd gasped. But no one ran. No one helped Horace either. Elias advanced. Rachel stood behind him, lips pressed tight, heart pounding. Horace stumbled back, hands up now. "You'll hang for this." "No," Elias said, low and cold. "I won't." Sheriff Crane stepped out from the saloon, rifle in hand, jaw tight. "This is done, Horace." "He shot my men." "They drew first," the sheriff said. "And I saw it. Hell, the whole town saw it." Horace paled. His bluster evaporated like water on iron. You can't do this." "I ain't doing anything," Crane said. "You did it to yourself." The townsfolk were stepping out now, not in fear, but in solidarity. Old Mrs. Rourke, the butcher and his son, even the schoolteacher. All of them had watched Rachel humiliated, then nearly killed, then rebuild what was lost. Now they stood with her. "You can leave," Rachel said, voice unwavering. You can leave and know you lost. Or you can try again and find out just how much fight is left in a woman you called ruined. Horace looked at them all, the rifle in Elias's hand, the resolve in Rachel's eyes, the quiet threat in the crowd's presence. And for the first time, he looked small. He turned and walked. His men followed, one limping, another cursing. No one helped them. When they were gone, silence returned. Then a slow ripple of movement as people returned to their lives, but not before a few of them tipped their hats or muttered quiet thanks. The tide had shifted. Rachel was no longer an outsider. She was someone they respected, maybe even feared a little. And that was fine. Later that evening, Rachel sat on the porch, feet up, her hand gently stroking her belly. You think he'll come back? She asked. Elias stood beside her, whittling a small piece of wood into something that resembled a rocking horse. Maybe, he said. But if he does, it won't end the same. Rachel looked out at the twilight settling over the hills. I was so scared, Elias. Not just of him, but of never being seen, never being wanted. You were seen, he said softly. By the wrong people, maybe. But I saw you. I still do. She reached out, touched his hand. And I see you too. Not the past. Not the name you ran from. The man you chose to become. He didn't speak, but his fingers tightened around hers. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. A quiet reminder of everything still ahead. When the sun dipped below the ridge, a peace settled that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with belonging. Real, honest belonging. Weeks passed. The child was born on a stormy morning, screaming and red-faced, with fists like firecrackers. A girl. Strong, healthy, loud. Rachel named her Hope. Elias held her with hands that once knew only weapons, and now cradled life. He whispered things no one else heard, things only a father would say. They built more than a home. They built a life. One where her name was no longer spoken with pity or contempt. One where his past no longer cast shadows. And the legend spread, quiet at first, then louder, of the woman who stood her ground. The man with no name who found it again through love. The fire that couldn't consume them. The town that changed because they chose to fight. In a corner of the West, where cruelty once reigned, something else took root. A new name, a new family, a new legend. And it all began with a woman no one wanted and a man who finally saw her.